Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Novels and Nightcaps, the podcast where we read, we drink, and we ramble. My name is Gabe,
And I'm Nor.
and today we are trying to get away with murder in Crime and Punishment, the 1866 literary classic by Dostoevsky. I honestly have never been able to say his first name, Fyodor. It doesn't sound right.
Fyodor.
I don't know. Fyodor, whatever. Yeah, I've had a collection of Dostoevsky books on my shelf for over a year now. I got them as a wedding present, and I've been really hesitant to get into it. And so I needed some encouragement getting started. And Nor, thank you for biting the bullet and reading Crime and Punishment with me. Crime and Punishment is about this poor ex-student in St. Petersburg named Raskolnikov, I believe. The names are going to be a struggle bus here, okay? But we're going to get through it, and we hope that you understand. Raskolnikov murders somebody. And that's about all the plot I actually want to give, because I think, honestly, the back of the book summary gives way too many details. And I didn't read it because I don't know. I guess I forgot to. And I only knew that there was a crime and a punishment. And that's all I knew going in. And I think that that's what somebody going in should know. But before we do any of that, we should probably start with some spoiler-free thoughts on the book. But Nor, what are you drinking? It's Novels and Nightcaps. We got to talk about our drinks.
Indeed we do. Today, I'm just getting myself a nice glass of water, because this was quite a sobering book. Did you like that?
That's really good. I did the opposite. That's good.
I was considering getting vodka, and then I remembered how much I hate vodka, so I didn't do that. Also, I haven't been drinking water for the last few days. I've been so busy with work that I think it's a good idea.
You're
But
making me
also,
thirsty.
this is it's a haunting portrait of life in Russia in the 1800s, and it's quite a sobering story, to the point where I think water actually might be the drink that I need after reading this book. But
Yeah.
what about you?
Yeah, so we're going to start off with a shot here. I made this beautiful, it's the Russian flag. So it's grenadine on the bottom, then blue curacao in the middle, and then I don't have any like cream, so it's just vodka on top. So we're going to start off with a shot here. Down it goes. And then I also have a Black Russian, is what it's called. I didn't mix it up yet because I thought it looked kind of neat like this. I don't know. It just feels, number one, it says Russian in the title. Number two, it feels right, doesn't it? It looks how I imagine a movie would look if it was made about Crime and Punishment.
And there is.
So yeah, it's coffee liqueur. I haven't seen it. Did you watch the movie?
I saw clips of it.
Well, that's really good. Why? Just to get a vibe for the book?
I couldn't fall asleep, and I was scrolling through YouTube, and it's royalty free. From what I've seen, it seems to have missed the mark on what this book is about, but I only saw a couple clips.
Yeah, so this is basically just coffee liqueur and vodka. It's an older iteration. There's the White Russian, which I believe I attempted. I attempted that in the cream curdled, and that was bad. It was really, really unfortunate. So this time I just decided to skip the cream altogether and have a Black Russian. Let's give it a taste. Wait, I need to mix this up. Don't I have a utensil? Yeah, I got a Sharpie. I'll mix it up with a Sharpie.
Oh, that's healthy.
Okay. Give it a little mix. Let's give it a taste. Actually, it's pretty good because I like coffee. And I added, instead of doing a 2-to-1 ratio of vodka to the coffee liqueur, I did a 1-to-1 just because I hate vodka. And it is quite tasty. So we should probably talk a little bit about the book. So our spoiler-free section, we'll do about 15 minutes, probably less given what I said earlier. I don't want to give too much away here. A little bit of spoiler-free, and then we'll dive into our in-depth impressions of the book. We axed style today. We usually go through character, plot, impact, style, and world. We axe style, and the reason is there's over 16, I think there is 16 English translations of this book. You know, it was obviously originally written in Russian. And we also read different translations. I had 2 on my shelf. And so I figured that one of them had to be the one that Nora was reading. And it turns out, Nora, which one were you reading?
Penguin's Classic.
Yeah, these aren't the same. So we just decided to axe style altogether. But I feel like we can talk about this in the spoiler free section. Nora, what did you What did get out of the style here? I've heard some complaints before we started.
I don't think this is Dostoevsky's fault at all. I think, honestly, this has to do with the fact that this is a translation of an older work written in Russia. It felt to me like I was reading a PDF, like just a really poorly edited PDF with really long paragraphs and a lot of wall text. That's what it felt like to me. So it was a bit of a struggle. I don't know how accurate that is to the original. I also acknowledge the fact that, this book was written 200 years ago or 150, something like that. So I'm not going to try to blame it too much. I don't want the style to really influence kind of my rating and my view on this book as a whole, because I think it's a great book. So I just didn't want to, deal with that at all. And also we did different translations, so we got rid of style. But for me, that was my experience.
Yeah, I honestly I do mostly agree. It was not an easy read by any stretch of the imagination. I had the benefit of listening to the audiobook and reading it physically, so I was doing a sort of immersive reading situation, and that proved the most effective. I had a hard time really focusing in and catching exactly what was happening with the story when I was just reading, but combining it with the audiobook version was beneficial. So for anybody that is thinking about reading this and you're intimidated by it, that's my recommendation: is get an audiobook, make sure it matches the translation that you are reading, and roll with this. Will Poulter did an audiobook in this, and he did an excellent job. I will say he did a very, very good job. And so, yeah, that's my recommendation. Get the Will Poulter edition and listen along while you read. And that is by far, I mean, honestly, it's kind of impossible to follow if you're just listening because of how out of date, honestly, like the style is. It's very difficult to just track, but reading it and listening to it is the way to go. Uh, that Nor who is this book for? Who would enjoy this book?
This book is for anyone who is really into philosophy and psychology and criminal justice and true crime and just good old classic literature, I think. This is a very sort of dark and somewhat depressing story, but it's not necessarily the most dark and depressing read. It is to some extent. It's a bit misleading, I think. It is not an easy read, despite what some back covers might try to tell you.
The first sentence of my translation, I have the 1914 Constance Garnett translation. The very first sentence says, "Crime and Punishment is one of the greatest and most readable novels ever written," which is a flat out lie. So yeah, don't believe it. Don't believe it. That's why I also said don't read the back of it. It's not worth reading. It spoils stuff. It makes you have expectations that I don't think you need whenever getting into the book. Just know it's about a guy in St. Petersburg who murders somebody. That's all you need to know. But yeah, just to tack onto that, a little bit more, 100%. Anybody who's extremely into literature or is comfortable reading classics, this is. I don't want to. I don't want to intimidate people with it. That's the problem here. Is it wasn't an easy read, and I will 100% admit that. However, I do think it was worth the read. I don't think it compares to. I actually have never read Moby Dick, but in my head, at least, Moby Dick seems really, really daunting of a task just because of the size. Like this, I mean, we read it in. I've only been seriously reading it for a couple weeks now, so we read it like fairly quick. So we probably missed out on a lot that you could have read if you really break it down into bite-sized chunks. But overall, if you are into classic literature, you're looking for something that challenges you intellectually, challenges your reading ability, to be honest. If you're looking for something like that, this is a great place. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of nuance, and a lot of depth. So if you want depth, I think this is a good place to go.
This is a book that is so rich and nuanced and, quite frankly, dense. This is a book that you would benefit from reading in a class. Like, when we were in college, we had that Moby Dick class that we kept kind of debating whether or not to take. Ultimately, we ended up going for the Spielberg class, the easier one. If
Yeah.
I can totally see there being like a college out there somewhere that does a class on Crime and Punishment or on Dostoevsky. Go ahead and enroll in that class. I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of it. I think it's 100% worth it. And I'm definitely interested in reading more of Dostoevsky's work. I also think you require a lot of context and like background knowledge to get the most out of this. And that brings me to my next point. This is a podcast where we read, we drink, and we ramble. I like to think we're very smart individuals, but there's going to be a lot of things we missed. We did read this book over the course of 2 weeks, kind of cramming for it. Some of us may or may not have finished this book. It was a big one. It was a big one. And we are only talking about it for like an hour. We're going to miss a lot of things. If you are looking for a very rich and nuanced, in-depth analysis of this book for your homework or for your essay or for your class, this is not the episode for it. This is just us talking about it. We're going to try to be smart about it, but I think that should be a fair warning. We're going to miss a lot of things, but we're going to
I'm
have a
really
good time.
selling the podcast. That's awesome. No, I completely agree, Nor. We're gonna give our takes, and they're probably wrong. But if you have any clarifications, any context or corrections, go ahead and drop those in the comments down below. We'd love to hear them. We'd love to see them because we're here to learn also, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. I feel like we should probably get into our actual spoiler section, right?
Yeah, let's do
I
it.
think it's about time. Okay, let's begin with characters. That seems like the natural starting place here. Nor, what did you give the characters and why?
You know, aside from the very complicated names and the fact that I got a lot of their names mixed up, I thought the characters were the strongest kind of point in this narrative. Each of them had their own distinctive voice, their own distinctive perspective on this like central plot. I gave characters a 9 out of 10, which is a really high score. I was a big fan of the characters and what they had to say. Specifically, Raskolnikov, right? The main character, the protagonist, who is very destitute and kind of views himself, beyond moral conventions. I'm just kind of quoting the back cover of my book. But I thought it was a great time and quite a fascinating dive into the psychology of someone who has committed a murder and his descent into madness and, and guilt.
Yeah. It helped a lot once I stopped because I was very confused like halfway through the book. I was just like, how are there so many characters in here? And then I realized, oh, they all just have three names. That's just not something I was contextually familiar with. So this kind of goes with the context bit we were talking about earlier of, yeah, in Russian, apparently there's like three different names. You have your given name that, I don't know, it's not a middle name, but it's like a middle name that combines your father, like your father's, and then if you're male or female, I don't know. There's a bunch of details, but it made a lot more sense so that whenever I started reading, I was able to catch on and be like, okay, Rodya is also Raskolnikov, like is also like the Romanovich, or they're all the same person, but the terms would be used interchangeably. And that was very difficult for me, I guess, as an American to understand and grasp onto because there was no explanation, obviously, which it makes total sense, but it just goes to show like, it's kind of useful to do a little bit of research, probably while you're reading. Like that's what I did. I did some research while I was reading. I was able to get by. I give characters an 8.5 out of 10, pretty similar-ish score. The area that I just like, the reason that it didn't get to a 9 for me is I didn't particularly feel an emotional attachment. I felt a very strong intellectual attachment, and I loved the differentiation between them all because they all have like really distinct perspectives, like you said. And I really valued that. I think honestly, my favorite character was either Porfiry, the
I knew
detective
it.
guy.
I knew it.
I love the detective guy, but he was really fun. And then we were trying to figure out how to say his name before this. Sidrigailov was like, I did not care about him until the last like little bit of the book when all of a sudden he is extremely interesting. And that's my biggest problem with the book, I would say, is that there's not a very even disbursement. And this kind of goes to, I guess there's like that wall of text that you were talking about earlier of every character gets their super long monologue where they just kind of talk at Raskolnikov. And that's all fine and great, but it means that I care about one character at the beginning of the book, one character at the middle, one character at the end, but it doesn't feel very evenly dispersed. I don't know if that's a fair criticism, but it did impact the way I felt about the characters. because I mean I didn't care about Sigurgailof until the very end, and he was just a non-factor until then. And so I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I know you give it a 9 out of 10, so I'm not sure.
I honestly couldn't like articulate that issue until you just said it, but you are right. Some of the characters just kind of felt like they showed up at the right time and then became an afterthought, either before or I guess after, their like particular scene. They really do kind of serve more as like a plot point. Some of the characters do, which, it's I think it's valid for the book. I'm also really just trying to acknowledge that this book was written so long ago and like writing
Yeah.
conventions at the time were incredibly different. From what I know about this book, this was released like in a serialized manner, like on a literary magazine.
Oh,
Apparently,
was it?
yeah, I did skim through the introduction of this book, which helped a little bit. Apparently,
Oh, I should have done
this
that.
was a pretty big deal back then. Like people were like tuning in, like not each week. I don't think it released that often, but like however often it released, like they would tune in, read this. It was like the talk of all Russia, or at least Saint Petersburg. But yeah, I mean, some of the characters were not necessarily the most evenly spread. I think you're 100% right on that aspect.
No, that's actually a really good point. I wonder if really reading this in a serialized format would have changed things. It kind of does read that way. I always forget this when reading these sorts of classics. I mean, it's the same for kind of on a Christo, right? Like it's a lot of these older classics are released in a serialized format, and so they're a lot longer, and sometimes the pacing is uneven because it's paced for a different medium actually than a normal bound novel. I mean, I so whenever I'm writing and I'm sending stuff, I send it to my dad. He's always like my proofreader. Am I crazy? Does this actually make sense? And so I'll send him like each chapter by chapter, each first draft. And he is like, good job, or he doesn't say bad job, but he like points out things. But also whenever he thinks the pacing is one thing, whenever I go back after reading the first draft and read it as like a full collection, as a full book, the pacing reads very differently than a like spaced out chapter by. I mean, it's the same thing for a TV show, right? If you're watching a TV show as it's releasing week by week, it feels very very different than if you binge it in a night. Like it has a completely different reading or watching experience. So I imagine that does definitely change how we understand and process the novel, and perhaps we're reading it in the improper format. Like this isn't how it was intended. So that's a very good point, because I think that the the uneven spacing might not mean as much if you're reading it in that sort of way, because you're reading it for what's happening that week, which is a bit different. No, I okay. Who was your favorite character? I said Porphyry for me. Who's your favorite character?
I think Porfirio was really high up. He was really funny, and he kept me laughing. I think Raskolnikov was probably my favorite, but then there was also Razumin.
Yeah,
Razumin, yeah,
or
the
Razumian,
Razumian, yeah, the his
or just the good pal. Yeah,
Raskolnikov's foil. I thought he was fascinating, just from a psychological viewpoint. They come from the same background, the same struggles, and yet he, instead of kind of whining about it and letting his environment take over him, he takes initiative. He takes agency. He struggles. He puts in the work, and even though he's in the exact same position as Raskolnikov, he is still kind of thriving. He's still socializing. He's still kind of looking on the silver lining. He has a bright future ahead of him. Like he's earning his way. He's working his way back to university. Whereas Raskolnikov is in the same situation, and he just sits in his room and thinks all day, letting his thoughts get to him. Is spending all his time in his rat hole, as he describes it. I actually think like I can't pick who my favorite character is between the two, but their relationship and the way they kind of parallel each other and kind of contrast each other was really fascinating. I thought that was a really great part of the book. So those two
that's a good
characters.
point. Yeah, I that is completely fair. Razumian was a really likable character as a friend. Like he just was a good guy all around. It was really nice, and I think it worked extremely well as a character foil because of this whole extraordinary man theory that kind of drives the course of the book to some extent. I wrote down like a few questions here or there just because I don't know. It's always good to have these sorts of questions for a discussion like this, but to me it seemed pretty clear. But I wanted your perspective on this because I didn't know if this was just my reading or if this seemed obvious. Because obviously the central component of the book is the murder and the motive of the murder. Why did he do the murder? And whenever he talks to Sonia and confesses, he explains this extraordinary man theory and essentially says that's why, right? He wanted to prove to himself that he is this extraordinary man like Napoleon who's above the laws of man, above other people, right? And by murdering, he's able to essentially like elevate himself by proving himself better, I guess. Did you buy that? Is that actually the cause? I mean, especially from like the psychology perspective, is he just like nuts and that's actually why, or what did you think?
The way I read it, I think so. I did buy it. I think that's a quite feasible reason as to why he wanted to do this. It seems to like tie back to his like earlier writings and his whole thing. I don't know. What I'm guessing you didn't think so.
No, I did. What I thought was interesting though was that like he was, you know, I kind of chalked his insanity post murder up to this feeling of guilt as like the guilt is the proof that he is a common man, that he's unable to be this extraordinary man. Yet he was also crazy before the murder. Like the entire time we're with him in the book, he's pretty nuts. Like the entire time. I don't think we see him in a normal state, really. He's always nuts. So that's why I was a little bit like, okay, he also just kind of seems crazy. He seems mad. It's probably, I don't know if that's that's probably not a psychological term, but he seems like he needs some help. Seriously, from the very beginning, right? To drive yourself to murder to begin with kind of says to me at least that maybe this extraordinary man theory is the cover. Yeah, I mean, like, is I guess the maybe how he justified it to himself. That is, I guess, the definition of motive. But he seemed to have a lot of troubles beyond that. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's completely valid. I remember there's a passage here where they talk about insanity as something that can be corrected through like logic. Like, like
Yeah,
insanity is just like a sort of like slightly skewed logic and perspective of the world. And I think that has some merit to some extent. So I think your claim could be correct. Like, yeah, he might be insane because he kind of is, but insane in the way that people like Napoleon and Alexander the Great and Hitler were insane. Like they had a way different perspective of the world. They might not think that they're bound to the same like moral laws that we all are, but ultimately they are, at least the way I see it and the way I think most people would see it. So I think at the end of the day, when he realizes that he is in fact just a Laos as he calls himself, like he is not Napoleon. He is just this guy who thinks he is this extraordinary man. And even Porphyry calls him out on it. He's like, the murderer probably thinks he's one of the greats, but he is really just another common man. Which, by the way, every interaction between Porphyry and Raskolnikov was gold. It was so good.
yeah,
So
so tense. Like the cat and mouse game was brilliant. I don't think I've been trying to recall a similar feeling or similar intensity where I really didn't know if Porphyry knew or didn't know. Clearly, he has to know, but the way he talked just felt so friendly. I don't know how to explain that, but it was really, really tense.
it reminded me of Death Note. I don't know if you've seen Death Note.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I have.
It was
That's a really good
it was
point.
fascinating. It reminded me of Light and L, I think is his name.
Yes.
And that
Yeah.
relationship, that was interesting. And so seeing it in classical literature was pretty fun. I wouldn't be surprised if those characters are based on these characters, or the
Yeah.
archetype at least. But that was amazing.
Oh my
You know,
gosh, that just put I didn't think about that. That's brilliant. Yeah, that has to be certainly, right? Like that has to be
I'm
Death
sure
Note has to be based to some extent Crime and Punishment.
It honestly might be because this fits the type of story, kind of like the Odyssey, where like the archetypes. I mean, they didn't necessarily originate from these books, but these kind of became like the what's the word, like the epitome of those archetypes in a way. I think so. I wouldn't be surprised if the creator of Death Note was inspired by Crime and Punishment. It would not surprise me at all. But
That's fascinating.
like back to your question, I thought the reveal or the confession to Sonia was honestly one of the most beautiful aspects of the book. It really kind of channels that redemption that this book is kind of advertised as. It's crime and punishment. It's the guilt and the redemption, right? And so I thought like him finally accepting that he is not a Napoleon, that he's just a common man. That was interesting. And seeing, he's still kind of trying to rationalize his like the murder. He still kind of excuses himself at the end. He's not fully redeeming himself or like fully taking on the responsibility and the crime because
Yeah.
he still calls the old lady a hag. He still calls the old lady like someone who did deserve to die. Like at the end of the day, she was a horrible person, and he's still kind of using that as his excuse, which I thought, was fascinating. But as the ending kind of alludes, his story of redemption is, only just beginning.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's what was one of the most interesting elements of the story was this. And this kind of goes into Impact, at least for me. Like that's how I read into it, but it does converge a lot with character. I guess we should probably talk about Impact just because I mean that's kind of the conversation ish. Impact is always a difficult one. I give it a 9 out of 10, not because of Impact is in like tears or sadness, but just exactly what we're talking about now. This conversation about Raskolnikov admitted guilt, but not true guilt. It was guilt of the crime, of the legal crime, not of a moral crime. Like he never, not until the very end, whenever he is in Siberia and falls on his knees before Sonya, like before that moment, he is convinced that what he did was right. He's convinced that what he did was a test of self, essentially. It was a test. It was to see if he was this ultimate extraordinary man, and the devastation is that he's not, right? Like that's what's driving him insane is the fact that he's not an extraordinary man. And there's this one quote in the book where it says, "Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart." And that kind of characterizes the problem here. Is he sits all day in his, I think you called it a rat nest, right? Like a rat den in his home and just thinks. He thinks so deeply, and he is to some extent compassionate. We see him show compassion quite a lot without necessarily like needing something in return. That's not the goal. It feels very similar to Sidrugailov, who whenever he shows compassion or shows interest, it's usually with a lot of ulterior motive for the most part. And so like Raskolnikov is obviously different in that sense. I don't know. That was it was just very compelling. A lot of depth, a lot of nuance that I feel like you can go into for each and every character. The other thing that really impacted me that I thought a lot about was I I messaged you. I think I talked to you. I don't remember his name. The dad, Sonia's dad. He has I don't remember his name. He dies.
Mar, Mar
Marmalov. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There was this super long, it felt long at least. I felt like it was super long. This super long just monologue near the beginning of the book where Marmalov just spills his whole story. And I was incredibly annoyed. I told Nora, I'm like, I don't understand this crap. Like, this is stupid. And what did you know? I mean, you said this. You told me, you go, it probably has something to do later in the book. And yeah, it makes total sense. But in my brain, I was just annoyed that I had to listen to this drunk man tell me his life story that didn't seem to matter, which is me just being a little stupid. But the payoff of that was incredibly rich, obviously. And his wife's death, where she dies in the street of consumption, and she dies holding like what is it? It's a note of some kind. Essentially, it's a reminder of her family's status beforehand. And the entire time she's dying, she's fixating on what her family was and could have been, on the glory of it all, the nobility of it all, the status of it all. Yet in the end, she still dies of consumption, just like the rest. And I thought that was like so fascinating. And compare that with Sonia. Like she thinks she's all that, right? Not Sonia, the mom thinks that her family is supposed to have this elevated position, yet her daughter is a prostitute. Like, what do you do with that? And the delusion of it all. Every character had so many delusions that they ran their life off of, which felt just like real life. We all have our delusions, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what my delusions are because they're delusions, but I'm sure I have some.
Yeah, that's why when you said that Raskolnikov, like we meet him and he's insane, it's like I was thinking, well, I feel like all the characters in this book were a little crazy, especially Katerina, right? She was quite hyper fixated on the nobility of it all. I mean, she throws this lavish funeral banquet. I think it's a day after her husband dies, after criticizing everything and being penniless for most of the book. I thought that was fascinating, and the whole idea of like trying to flex her superiority that doesn't exist at all anymore. It's wholly within like her head that she is this famous person. Like she makes up all these stories and she keeps telling them to the point that she believes them herself. She believes that Lucian, yeah, she believes that Lucian is here to help her because he is a long lost like friend of a relative, which he is not. All those things I thought were fascinating. And at the risk of kind of stepping over to World, this is one of the arguments I made for keeping World in our rating, because originally we were thinking of axing both style and World. But I think the way that Dostoevsky writes about St. Petersburg and the slums and the underbelly of Russia, it felt like its own little character. It felt like its own little element in the story, and it plays such a big role, I think, because this book, while it is about the murder and kind of the downward spiral that it leads to, and all the questions of morality that arise from such a almost pragmatic murder, this is also a story, about all these other people and about how they deal with the poverty and the horrible, horrible conditions of life at the time, especially in Russia, especially in St. Petersburg, and especially in the slums, what poverty does to people and how it drives them to kind of extreme, desperate acts, like a murderer who, not Raskolnikov, but like a murderer who is so hungry, just he's just a beggar, he's really hungry, in an act of desperation, murders someone for their purse and doesn't even use that money to buy food, but instead goes to a bar to kind of forget about the fact that he just killed someone. That kind of like scenario that only really happens in such a horrible environment. And, you know, it kind of makes me question, like, is it the environment's fault? Is it the individual's fault? Is it a mix of both? And then you kind of get to see that through both Raskolnikov and Rashomon, right? Where one of them blames his environment and just kind of lets it kind of propel him to do the murder, even though at the end, he admits that it's for a different reason. Then you have Resumin who, tries to make the most of it. So I thought that was fascinating, and I
So
forgot where we were going with this.
do you think that in a different context, like if Raskolnikov had more money, right? If he didn't have this debt to this pawnbroker or that kind of thing, like, do you think that that would have changed anything? Would he still have committed a murder, or do you think it really hinged on this sort of desperation? I mean, obviously, there's the element that we've already talked about of the whole like extraordinary man. He has to go through the trials, all that stuff. But like beyond that, I think what you're saying is true. Fundamentally, there is a sort of material element to this.
I would need to think about it more, but I do kind of like right now. I think that if he had been in better conditions, he still would have found a way to test his kind of superiority, just in a different way, kind of the way he alludes to what Napoleon did. He says that for Napoleon, his obstacle were the nations and, you know, his enemies. But for Raskolnikov, his his obstacle at this present moment
The
was the
plot
fact that he
broker.
he has no money. So I think that's part of it. But at the end of the day, Raskolnikov is still just a ordinary man who is kind of delusional and thinks he is something greater than he is not. And
Did you
only
already say what you did you already say what you gave World? Did
I
you already
gave
say that?
World an 8 out of 10. I honestly think the more I'm talking about it, I think I would give it a bit higher of a score. And if I had more context, I can see myself giving this a much higher score.
No, I think that's actually a good point. With probably more context, I would have given it maybe a higher score also. I give an 8.5. It's a little bit higher than yours. I think the only reason I actually don't know the reason why I give it a higher score. I will say I was very attached to St. Petersburg. I've read a little bit of other like the short stories from Dostoevsky, and so it was interesting to place these in the same sort of world. I agree that context would have helped, but there's some context that I already did know, at least historically, worldwide. So one of the things that really pushed over the top for me was this element of America. I mean, we're both in America right now, so obviously I saw America on the page and I went, "Whoa!" And so the final words of Sidrigailov is like, "Tell them I'm off to America," right? He's like, "I'm going to America," before he shoots himself in the head. And that was like, whoa, what does that mean? What does that mean? And so that, I mean, the fact that Dostoevsky placed Russia, placed St. Petersburg within a broader context, broader and broader. And he was able to bring snippets here and there. He was able to talk about Napoleon. He talks about Napoleon a lot in a lot of stuff, but he's able to bring in Napoleon and other elements. It dated it, obviously. And I think that there's probably a lot of, like, there was I think a German, I don't know, composer or writer or something that I didn't actually know that I looked up at the time and I went, oh, that's interesting. So I'm sure there's a lot of other elements like that that if we were maybe, I guess, more knowledgeable on the period, we would get more. But to me, it was like a science fiction world in the sense of I didn't understand everything on the page, but I understood it meant that there was a lot of depth. And that was enough for me. I don't know if that tracks, if that makes
You
sense, but
I get it. You perceived the depth that was there, even if you yourself
yeah,
don't have the depth perception for it. I hear that. I think I'm
exactly.
on the same boat as you. I saw a lot of footnotes or but I'm not gonna check the
Yeah,
notes every single time.
yeah.
I tried. I tried it first, and I always do with these books. I always think to myself, like, this will be the book that I actually go back and read the footnotes. I'm not gonna do that. It's a lot of work.
Well, it's like if I had, if I take off my glasses, my vision's not that bad, but let's say it was, right? If I took off my glasses and I looked at mountains in the distance, I can see that there's something grand over there, but I can't really make out the details of how grand they are. But man, if I had those glasses, then I could see all the little trees, the snow on the mountaintops. Like I could see all of it. I could see all the details there. But even without them, I'm able to get a picture of the general scope in the scale. And that's how I felt here, at least. Like that, I don't know. That's definitely how I felt. It was difficult to gauge, though. I'm the one who proposed a cutting out world, just because I know that your standard for your world rating, I'm pretty sure we talked about this before, because your standard for world rating is it better or worse than Earth? Is it cooler or not as cool as the planet Earth? But this is the planet Earth. So I didn't know how we were going to rate it, but you found a way. So, Nori, would you care to explain how you found a way?
I think my view of the world has changed since that fateful episode I said that. I honestly think our world is pretty cool. But I guess world just kind of means a whole lot more than just world building. But the way the author kind of portrays the world, the way it almost feels like its own character. Like I think we talked about this before, how world building feels more important than like sci-fi and fantasy because these are different worlds and you do have to create that and there's a lot of creative aspects and some like big level like decisions that you have to make about that. But I also think that these classics and other books set in our world, the world building also does play a role. because even if it's from the first point of view and it takes place in our default, the reality that we live in, and the book is not necessarily like concerned with it, like if the book is really grounded, it's still giving us the world through the point of view of the character. And that world is different than the world that you or I perceive. And in this case, not only is this world 150 years into the past, it's also Russia, and it's also told through the point of view of someone who has gone through a lot of hardship. From what I remember in my literary classes, and from what I remember from the brief YouTube videos that I saw to kind of gain some context for this book, Dostoevsky was in the military, or he worked in like the police. He had something to do with like law enforcement. He had a somewhat promising career. He let it all he left it all behind for, like revolutionary ideas. Like he met with scholars and discussed ideas that were dangerous, kind of like Ellen in Mistborn, one of our episodes that we've talked about. So he was a philosopher. He thought about these ideas, these radical ideas, and he got sentenced to death, and he was given a pardon. I think they called it a mock uh execution, where they almost pulled the trigger, but they didn't. They pardoned him. And so that kind of experience leaves a mark on an individual, and it can definitely change the way you see the world. And so this is a man who has gone through so many experiences, many of which I can't even imagine. And the way he paints St. Petersburg and Russia and kind of the moral landscape of that time and that place, that's enough for me to be able to say, you know what, the world here it plays a huge role, and it shapes the characters. It's the environment it does play a big role into kind of the insanity that we're talking about here. The insanity that seems to kind of permeate every character in this book. The insanity that Raskolnikov kind of dreams about at the end in the epilogue, as it spreads throughout the time and space, and kind of invades people and makes them think that they're superior and beyond moral conventions.
I like what you said there, because I think that I mean, the reality of St. Petersburg for most commoners, I doubt that they would have ran into so many philosophical quandaries. Like there's a lot of deep scholarship here, but that speaks to what Dostoevsky was interested in and the elements that he wanted to elevate within the city. And I really was taken aback by how sophisticated the scholarship was and how sophisticated the intellectual landscape really was. Because that's not something, this is my fault. This is not something I typically associate with Russia, and I should. I mean, I got to give credit where credit's due, because there seems to be, at least according to this book, which feels very realistic in a lot of elements. Not all, but a lot of elements feel very realistic and grounded in how people react to things and how the world kind of works. And so, with that being said, it feels very intellectual. It feels very, very deep. And I don't know, the richness of a culture, I felt really showed on the page here. And it felt different yet also similar to what we have, and I think that's intentional. There should be some universal elements that leap off the page and feel relevant regardless of situation and circumstance. But yeah, I was really taken aback by how much I felt attached to the world, and how much I felt attached to St. Petersburg in general. We should probably talk about the plot, right? The plot is the final element we have to talk about here. I give an 8.5 out of 10. I thought it was really good. I thought it had a little bit of room to get a little bit better, but I will definitely say each section, each part had something that really gripped me and kept me extremely engaged. I mean, you messaged me immediately whenever you got to the murder scene. You were like, "This is intense, bro." Like, I know. I was on the edge of my seat for what's he gonna do it, and it was incredibly engaging. Up to that point, it was kind of difficult to get into the book, but once the murder happened, and then he had to go get away with the murder, and then in his kind of crazed state, he goes to the site of the murder, which I was just, when I was reading it, I was like, "Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that." But he did it, and Every interaction felt like it had meaning and weight. To me at least, I felt that there wasn't a page that was worthless. It felt like everything needed to be here and everything had its place. And while it was dense, and while it was probably wordy at times, it felt so intentional. And that also worked for the plot as well. It was simple, honestly. I think we could very easily note by note summarize what happened. Some of the relational elements got a little bit complex and the web sort of grew, which I think is good, but I was engaged. I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, did you have the book spoiled? Sometimes with classics, I think it can be beneficial to know the full story before reading it. I didn't know the story. So I didn't know whether or not he went to prison or whether or not he escaped and fled, or I had no idea what was going to happen. And I didn't try to guess. I just kind of went with it. Did you have any prior knowledge? Did you have an inkling? What was your experience?
No, I didn't know much about this book. I I knew there was a murder. I knew there was a murder committed, and I knew that the book kind of explored the aftermath of that. So I guess the only thing I knew for sure was that the murder was committed. But not no, I went in blind for the most part. It was honestly quite rewarding. I guess I did read the back cover, and the back cover kind of, does give away too much. It kind of primes you to read the book, and sometimes I think it's better to just go in blind. But it was quite the experience. And you gave it an 8.5. I give it an 8, so just a little bit lower than you. I think we hit on the same points. When it comes to our ratings, I honestly think that the point 0.5 is kind of arbitrary, but we're trying to get better at it. So I couldn't tell you why I didn't give it an 8.5. But the way I see it, yeah, the plot is on paper quite simple. You definitely can summarize it point by point. The pacing was a bit weird, but I think that has to do with, so many other factors that it's not worth kind of honing in on. I think that's also why we asked style. Each part though felt self-contained, and I think knowing that this was a serial or like a serialized storyline kind of helped with the moments, like the big moments, the big twists and turns, because almost every chapter would end with like a cliffhanger. Every part definitely ended with a cliffhanger, and I could picture myself in 1800 Russia, tuning in to my literary magazine and reading that part and being so stressed out and having to wait God knows how many months until I could read the next part. I can definitely see
Man,
it had the pacing of a TV show in a way, or like a limited series, and I thought that was really great and quite. I was not expecting that for a classic.
that's actually a really good point. I think we've talked a little bit about this before. I have this hunger for good serialized fiction. There's not really any grand outlet that's there to produce such materials on a massive scale, nor do I really think that there is the audience for it, to be honest, because we have TV shows and serialized content in other forms. I just don't think there's an audience there that wants to read a book being serialized. But I pretty much exclusively, nowadays at least, there's some occasions where I'll watch or binge a TV show, but the way I finish a good TV show is I watch it when it comes out. I watch it every week. Like Euphoria right now is the rage, right? That's what I'm watching each and every week as it comes out. And you bet I will finish that show. I did it with The Pit. I did it with The Knights of the Seven Kingdoms. So that is just the way that I watch TV, and I think it would be incredibly satisfying to read books that way too. And I'm pretty sure there are a few places out there that authors will upload their stuff online. That makes sense. It's usually not as polished though, because it's typically just like an open form where an author will write the next chapter and upload it there. But it'd be really nice to have sort of formalized, high quality zine content. I just don't think that's a is that an opportunity? Can that happen in the modern era? Is there room for serialized content like that?
I'm on the same boat as you. I know that Matt Dinniman, author of Dungeon Crawler Carl, that's how he started. I know Andy Weir had a blog. So not maybe not as serialized, but in a way, yeah, it was serialized. But I also think those are like survivor stories. Like there's so many people that are doing that, but not many people are reading them, and only the big hits make it out. I do wish that was like a thing. I do wish we kind of went back to like a serialized format, even with shows. Like we have a couple that are coming out, like Euphoria. In my case, I'm watching Daredevil, Born Again, and Maul, the Star Wars show, and seeing them week by week. It's honestly kind of fun. I also think there's a merit to like seeing one episode or reading one chapter, kind of letting it sit with you for a week. You think about it, you kind of speculate on what's going to happen next and how this plays a role into the larger story. And that you kind of do miss with kind of binging everything. I honestly do wish there was a market for this. I think when I was in high school, one of my kind of like silly little dreams that I had was to create like a literary magazine, or like a sort of like a little magazine or like a blog where like you're releasing chapter by chapter, or you kind of
Bro,
curate like stories.
that's not a silly little dream, bro. You could do it. You can do whatever you set your mind to, Nor.
Thank you. Because here at Novel's
I feel like it's
Nightcaps, we
obligatory.
believe. Dream
We
big.
believe in oh
Dream
man.
big. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah,
If you
dream big,
if
but keep your feet on the ground. Keep your feet on the ground, but look at the stars. Yeah,
if you want to
100%.
get rid of that pesky pawnbroker
Mm,
to pursue your dreams,
get rid of her.
maybe don't murder her, but talk
Don't
to
murder
her.
her. Sorry, my bad. Yeah, sorry. Oh my gosh. No, I'm glad you mentioned Dungeon Crawler Carl. This is a little off topic, but I will say I paused reading Dungeon Crawler Carl in order to really focus on Crime and Punishment, which felt like a big grown-up move.
Me too.
I felt like a grown-up doing that. And I paused. I'm really excited to get back. I'm really excited to get back to the simple world. Well, it's not a very simple world. It's quite a complex world, but the books are fun and I just get to enjoy it. And I get to turn my brain off. And if I stop focusing for a little bit, I feel like I don't lose much. And that's really enjoyable because here I lost. I had to go back so many times, be like, wait, I did not focus there. I have no idea what just happened. I got to read that again. So I'm excited to go back to a book that's a little bit easier on my brain. But I gotta say, I think it's a good thing that we, for those who didn't watch last week's, no, 2 weeks ago, last episode, which was on Hyperion. Hyperion was great, and I thought that was a brilliant bridge, honestly, into something like this because our brains were already sort of in that sort of literary mode. We were ready to talk about something literary, ready to read that. Our brains were acclimated. So moving into something like this felt a lot more manageable than if we were to go from something like Dungeon Crawler Carl straight to Crime and Punishment. That would have been a harder jump, I feel. So I think we did a nice job there planning. Our planning situation was good. So good job, Nor. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you for picking Crime and Punishment and adding it to the list. Let's
I
see. We talked about character, we talked about
yeah,
plot, we talked about
yeah.
impact, and we talked about world. We are not talking about style.
No. We already did. We did talk about style,
We did
but
talk
just
about the
slightly.
style, but we're not rating it.
Oh, we should probably give it we need to give it so our overalls, just for those who are curious, who are, tracking along with us. My overall score was a 8.6 out of 10. That's accumulated. We changed the percentages just a tad in order to accommodate, number one, the style in which we're reading this book, as in it's literary fiction. It's obviously not science fiction and fantasy. So you got to devalue the world just a little bit. We got to take out the style. So it was changing the parameters there, but 8.6 out of 10 for me. Nor, what did you give it?
I give it an 8.5. Don't really know how we got different scores because we have the same like single scores. At least they're
It's
distributed. They're
because the
distributed
value system,
differently.
right? Yeah, it's because like one of them is the percentage wise is higher,
I
right?
I think that's it. I think there's like a 10% difference. The
Or I
math
did the
gets
math wrong.
complicated.
Yeah. Or I
We
did
got
the
a
math wrong.
we got a historian over here, and we
I
have
had
a
ChatGPT do the math. I
psychologist.
didn't do it. Okay. So for real, Nor sent me the change, and then I copied it into ChatGPT, and then I went, "This is what I put in as the scores. What is the total score?" And so it's not my fault. I don't do math. That was my way to deal with the changing tides, because I'm so used to just one thing. I can't change it whenever there's different variables and things. I don't know if that's the right number.
Anyway, for whatever reason, be it human error or, the distribution, we have a point 0.1 difference in our scores, but it's basically the same thing. Like Gabe said, we inflated character, we kind of lowered world. Actually, we increased world. We just got rid of style, I think.
My bad, guys. I lied.
Yeah.
Okay,
So, don't listen to Gabe. He was wrong.
sorry.
But
But I did give it okay. So for our collage, our non-objective collage, I give it a collector's edition. Okay, I'm thinking leather bound, or I could be hardcover. I think this counts as a collector's edition. I don't know. Let me take off the paper, the dust jacket, so we can get a good look at it. I think it might just be a no, 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 no. Look at this. This is like a nice edition. This is the type that you put on your dad's bookshelf. I feel happy about this. So I already have it. And this is what I feel like it should be. It should be the type of book that you feel scared to actually read because you might hurt the spine. That's my opinion on
yeah,
things.
the spine. I mean, I guess from a distance, the spine on my book looks fine. But if you look really closely, it's
Oh, I
kind of
see it. Yeah,
destroyed.
you read it. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good proof.
I read it,
Does
and that's
mine,
proof. And I'm proud of myself for
if you
reading
look
this.
really, I don't know if you can look closely. You probably don't see it because mine's a different color. You can kind of see the bend in the spine. See? Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Look at that from that angle. Yeah, there you go.
yeah, you
See,
read
you
it.
can see. Yeah, there's
You made
proof.
it
I didn't annotate this one though.
at least halfway through, from what I can see.
Yeah,
No,
yeah. I
but
got halfway through and then stopped.
I think the way you described it, kind of, you hit the nail on that. This is the type of book that you you keep in your study. You kind of have it on your shelf, and you kind of flex that you read it. I was trying to troll you on the notes, and so I wrote paperback for a class. But
I saw that and I was worried. I was like, no, that's not true.
really, this is like hardcover collector's edition material. This is honestly that kind of book. There's a reason it's a classic. I think when you really think about it, trying to decipher what makes a classic or why this book is a classic, I really do think it's like the ideas that this book has are so complex and nuanced. And we spent a lot of time talking about like the idea of the extraordinary man. But according to a video that I saw, trying to get some more context and not feel too dumb, the idea of the Uberman comes from like Nietzsche, right?
Yeah.
But Nietzsche didn't write about this concept until about 10 years after this book was published. Dostoevsky didn't
Well,
even know about Nietzsche, from what I understand, from my very basic understanding of this. So the times don't quite add up, and yet they talked about the same topic. And it's such a precise kind of like
yeah.
depiction of this or of these ideas that, were they ahead of his time, or were they just like two figures that were able to pinpoint on something that was happening at the time, the moral shift. I think it's just fascinating. This is such a smart individual, Dostoevsky, and I definitely want to keep reading more about his works. I definitely think that I will be revisiting this book at some point, although I think that point will be a long time from now because I need a break.
Wow.
But
You
yeah,
just broke my brain. I totally read this and was like, oh, he's writing against Nietzsche and like the Ubermensch. Like, I fully thought that's what he was writing against. I didn't realize. So, the Ubermensch was a novel in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I haven't actually read this. I know the concept. I haven't read the actual work because I'm actually a history guy, not a philosophy guy. But it was composed and published between 1883 and 1885, which, as we said at the beginning of the podcast, for anyone paying attention, this was published in 1866. So that's obviously a big disparity. So very clearly, he was writing with some really deep philosophical thoughts that there's a strong possibility people at the time wouldn't have necessarily considered before. So I don't know if this was in the cultural zeitgeist at the moment, and he was capitalizing on thoughts and development already there, and it's something that Nietzsche, was kind of just restating, and then it's like whenever your friend tells a joke and then you say it and then everybody laughs.
That
I don't
Jordan
know if
Peele,
that's
that Key and Peele
yeah,
skit. Yeah.
I don't know if that's what's happening, where Nietzsche just happens to get the credit for it. Maybe that's probably a gross oversimplification of both what Nietzsche is trying to say and also what Dostoevsky is trying to say. So I apologize for that. But that's 100% what I read into it. So that's a very fascinating thing.
Yeah, no, I'll link a couple of videos on the description to kind of provide some more background knowledge, at least the ones that I saw, because I want to give credit where credit is due. But I thought it was fascinating, and I think honestly this book undoubtedly deserves to be considered a classic. It deserves its hardcover collector's edition. It needs to be pristine and sitting on my shelf like a trophy that I was able to get through. I'm proud of that. And you should be too. And anyone reading
Yeah.
this book, anyone who has read the book should be proud of having read this book.
Yeah. And you should tell all your friends.
You should
Tell all
flex
your
about
friends
it
that you
because
read
you
it.
are the extraordinary
You
man.
are.
You are.
You are the Ubermensch.
You are the Uberman. You are beyond these peasants. So go ahead and
No,
flex.
no, please don't think that. Please don't think that. No, no, you're not. You're ordinary. You
You
out
are
there, you're an
yeah.
ordinary person. You will feel guilt if you kill someone. Don't do that. Everybody, everybody just relax. Maybe go to the bar, have a drink, have a nightcap, some would say. Noah, did you finish your drink?
I did.
Me too. I finished both my drinks, actually. Because here at Novels and Nightcaps, we finish our drinks. Everybody have a good night.